35 Battlefield maps. Just think about that for a second. That is the number of maps Battlefield 1942 had back then. I have to say that was at the end of its cycle, obviously not at launch, but that was the number of maps we had. Now, that's a bit of an unfair comparison with Battlefield 6, since it basically just launched, but you can already see a pattern. Since we're obviously only getting 2 maps per season, at least for the first 2 seasons, we're seeing a major difference. What happened? There must be a reason. Maybe this modern standard is simply too massive. And of course, a map built for 1942 back then isn't remotely comparable to the map being built for Battlefield 6 now. The level of complexity we have in the maps for Battlefield 6, I believe the destruction and everything else is second to none in the industry. But let's take a closer look at that. Welcome to an analysis of quality versus quantity and the price of progress. Maybe a quick overview to start. How many maps individual Battlefield titles launched with from back then until today? Because when we look at that, we see there isn't actually a huge difference between Battlefield 6 and the older, let's say, modern Battlefield titles. Except for 1942, that's a bit of an outlier. But you also have to remember back then, maps were delivered differently than they are today. Battlefield 1942 launched in 2002 with 16 maps. In 2004, 2 years later, came Battlefield Vietnam with 14 maps. Only 1 year later, in 2005, Battlefield 2 with 12 maps. After that, only 1 year later, you could see how fast the Battlefield titles were coming out back then, came Battlefield 2142 in 2006 with 10 maps. Then there was a bit of a cut and we moved on to Frostbite engine. Battlefield Bad Company in 2008 with 12 maps. Battlefield 1943, though you can't really compare that, well, with 4 maps. 2010 brought Bad Company 2, one of the most iconic games, also with 10 maps at launch. And then from 2011, we can call it the modern era of Battlefield games. Battlefield 3 with, in quotes, only 9 maps. 2013, Battlefield 4 started with 10 maps. Hardline in 2015 with 9 maps. In 2016, Battlefield 1 also with 9 maps. 2 years later, Battlefield 5 with only 8 maps. Then 2021, I almost skipped it and forgot, Battlefield 2042 with 7 maps. And now Battlefield 6 in 2025 with 9 maps. As you can see, the number of maps Battlefield 6 launched with compared to all others isn't actually that bad. It's on par with the more modern Battlefield titles from Battlefield 3 onwards. Looking back at the early 2000s again, like I said, Battlefield 1942 launched with 16 maps and expanded to a total of 35 maps with expansions like Secret Weapons. And of course, maps were simpler back then. We had static lighting, little to no destruction, and generally the whole thing was just a bit more straightforward. In Battlefield 2, we reached a total of 29 maps by the end. Strike at Karkan, for example, is something very iconic from that era, but things worked differently then. You went to the store, bought CDs, and that's how you got your expansions. Then came the ominous premium model, which certainly had its advantages, but people might be viewing it through rose-tinted glasses now because of how things are currently running. And of course, a lot changed with the Frostbite engine. The maps became graphically more opulent, there was much more destruction, and everything was just a bit more complex than before. Battlefield 3 ended up with 29 maps, Battlefield 4 even with 33. But it was structured differently. You ran to the store, bought the new DLC, and you kind of knew what you were getting. Every 3 months, 4 new maps, gadgets, weapons, etc. But of course, this also splits the community into premium and non-premium. Those who had the DLC or bought it, and those who didn't. So splitting the community wasn't such a great move, even if it sounds good at first. Then came the shift. Live service is the key word. No more paying for map packs, everyone plays together. Sounds great and sounds fair actually. But yeah, the numbers tell a different story. Battlefield 2042, for example, started with fewer maps and the content drought basically became a meme. In 2042, the maps became massive and bloated, but also kind of lifeless, just a bit empty. 2042 had its fans, definitely, but objectively speaking, it was a flop. Battlefield 5 ended up with 20 maps, though it was simply dropped. I'm still of the opinion that as a top-tier game, it definitely should have been developed further. If iconic things from World War II like Stalingrad, Normandy, etc. had been added, it would have been absolutely legendary in my opinion. But sadly, it is what it is. Battlefield 2042 ended with only 15 maps, not counting Portal, but we're talking about the main game here. And that brings us to the here and now. Battlefield 6 launched on October 25 with 9 maps. Honestly, by Battlefield standards, that's a solid start. But of course, it's a far cry from something like the 16 maps of 1942. Though, as I said at the beginning, that's just a different era. Back then, a dev probably slapped a map together in a few weeks. Nowadays, it probably takes a few months. I once heard that it takes 6 months to a year, actually. But that's without a warrant. No idea if that's true. The fact is, it obviously takes indefinitely longer than it used to. However, there's also more money and more staff than ever before for Battlefield. So you'd think it might balance out, but that doesn't seem to be the case. The mentioned 2 maps per season is quite thin. So after Season 2, we'll have 13 maps in Battlefield 6, and that's after a good half year or more after release. But what definitely must be said is that the maps in Battlefield 6 are technological masterpieces. The level of destruction offered to us and the pure visuals are definitely peerless. You have to be honest about that in the end. But the question naturally arises, what would you prefer? 10 highly complex, insane maps where everything is destructible and that have to be meticulously crafted? Or 30 simpler maps? Write your opinion in the comments. But one thing remains a reality. We have traded the sheer mass of maps from the past for very intense gameplay experiences today, which of course take a while to arrive. If you go back just a few years and compare Battlefield 6 with Battlefield 5 in terms of atmosphere, you'd be surprised how quiet Battlefield 5 is all the time, which brings its own set of problems like not hearing footsteps, etc. in Battlefield 6. But that's another topic. We'll save that for another video. Oh, actually I made a video. Maybe watch that. It's in the info box right now. I think I know what your opinion is likely to be, but write it in the comments anyway. Are you satisfied with Battlefield 6, with the amount of content we're getting, or not? And what might also interest you is definitely this video here. Check it out, tell me what you think, or click right here. That also supports the channel, of course. I hope you enjoyed this little nostalgic journey through Battlefield, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!